I wonder why Justin Richards likes Russia so much. I'm not usually a fan of Russian or Soviet-based stories because they're done quite a lot, but this one is actually quite interesting. I only say that as Justin Richards, author of The Clockwise Man, the first installation in the new series Adventures, also had elements of kind of Russian Tsars and stuff like that. So initially, the setting of a Cold War outpost in the outskirts of Russia didn't really entice me. But the contrast of this book compared to the pace of Winner Takes All, the kind of breakneck, non-stop action, to this kind of slow, mysterious thriller that ramps up slowly but surely and kind of progressively gets more and more intricate, was a really nice change. The biggest thing I noticed, however, was how inaccurate Jack's character was in this story. The Deviant Strain is the first in another set of 3 new series adventures with Deviant Strain, Only Human, and The Stealers of Dreams. These 3 reflected the change in cast later on in series 1 by adding Captain Jack into the mix. Although these books were released in September 2005, a few months after Christopher Eccleston had regenerated into David Tennant, so Christopher Eccleston wasn't even the incumbent Doctor at the time of these books. So that's what makes Captain Jack's character really interesting here, because of how different it feels. Again, I'm not sure of the writing process that Justin Richards and the other authors have to go through to write these books. I'm not sure of the timeline, but it feels like for this one, they would have had more clue as to what Jack's character like. And it's not to say he isn't kind of confident and charismatic, but he isn't as suave and con-man-y as he is in The Empty Child and The Doctor Dances. Jack here is funny, but he's also more serious and abrasive, and assuming this is Jack's or one of Jack's first adventures with the Doctor and Rose following The Empty Child and Doctor Dances, you would expect him to be more like his suave, confident con man self. But here he is very different. He's compassionate and he almost trusts the Doctor entirely. You really don't get the kind of challenging male egos of the Doctor and Jack against each other in this novel. They kind of are almost already friends, which you kind of never really get within Doctor Who, except maybe with 13 and Jack. There is also a passage on page 42, which is quite ironic given Jack's future as the face of Bo. I used to think I was scared by death, or by facing death by combat and action and the uncertainty of the battlefield. Not anymore. No, now what scares me is the possibility I might live to grow old. I might wake up one day tired and wasted and unable even to open a beer. I might need crutches and a hearing aid and help getting dressed. When and if I get to that point, it'll be my memories that'll keep me going. The fact that I've lived through so much, survived so much to get there. Do you want to get old? He asked, prodding Sergeyev in the chest. Do you want to end up with only your memories to make up for the loss of your faculties? He pointed across the room. Look at her, look, she's there already, 19, and she can barely walk on her own. She should be looking forward to her whole life, not staring at the end of it and wondering what happened, if she can wonder at all. And that's in regards to a character called Valeria that Jack feels very protective of throughout the course of the story, as when the story opens, as this 19-year-old girl essentially has the life force sucked out of her, and through the rest of the book, she's like a husk of herself. She's still there, but she's not there, if that makes sense. In comparison though, the Doctor and Rose feel very comfortable in their relationship, and the characterizations of both of them are probably the most accurate we've had so far. Rose here is very confident on her own and able to make her voice heard in these new strange environments. The trio do split off to investigate different areas of this village and kind of interact with different sides of the plot, and it does make the kind of combination of those things quite satisfying. But speaking of characters, I did very nearly lose track of quite a lot of the side characters due to the book interestingly referring to them both as their first and last name but in separate situations. So a few pages before it referred to them as one name, and then they'd refer to them as their surname in the next one, as if I had suddenly for whatever reason remembered what their full name was the first time they introduced them. And even then there are a lot of kind of generic Russian names and soldiers, and it's quite difficult to keep track of them as well. The plot itself though is quite similar to The Girl in the Fireplace, with a crashed or dying ship using remotes, as they're called in this story, to regain power from, well, in this case, the energy of human beings, not just human beings towards the end or like at the beginning or whatever. They would come to like the energy from human beings, but it's not just human beings here. But the storytelling here is phenomenal. The most impressive part of this story is just simply how cinematic it was. I kind of got this a little bit with The Clockwise Man, but with the way that the Doctor and Rose specifically speak, but just the way that the plot progressive and cuts to other things, it feels like I'm watching a Doctor Who episode, or I suppose a Doctor Who film in this regard. The pacing and characters for the most part were almost perfect, and you really did believe and understand their motives, good or bad. A group of people are trying to live forever through the technology of this ship, and then they go crazy with power. But then on the other hand, you have my favorite side character of this story, Alex. He's one of the many scientists at the research lab at this village, and he has a really complicated backstory which leads him to being more of an outcast compared to the rest of the scientists and villagers. He has a couple secrets that people hold against him. They think these things are bad, and a lot of people don't trust him, but he doesn't care. He understands the things that he's done in the past were necessary, and he has to lie about them or take the hit for them whatsoever. And before he really feels like he's been accepted back into the community, specifically by this one guy who he thinks Alex drove this person that he knows to suicide. Alex does actually end up sacrificing himself, and Alex isn't the only person who dies in this story. A number of people die, a lot of unnamed characters, but named characters as well. And this story is not afraid to shy away from death. Obviously, I think that's really important in a lot of Doctor Who stories, because you know that the TARDIS team is going to survive. You know they're going to get through it. So what is the point of having really them in peril? It's interesting to have Jack have an aim, a specific aim to help people with his compassion with Valeria. So Valeria is his aim. Obviously, the Doctor has many aims. Rose doesn't necessarily have a specific aim, although she does have this really interesting plot with this character, this policewoman called Sophia, who is the first indication of something bad going on. She's fine, and then suddenly she is attacking Rose and stuff like that. It is really interesting. So I definitely, so far, 100%, if you just want interesting characters and interesting plot, I would 100% pick up this book. Although I'd be lying if I said I understood everything in the climax. Similar to the climax of The Clockwise Man, everything is just way too convoluted. The environment is just so difficult to understand. In The Clockwise Man, obviously again by Justin Richards, the kind of final fight with the bad guy is at the top of Big Ben. And I don't understand Big Ben. I don't know what that looks like. Justin Richards was there. He went. He probably understands what it's like. But when you're talking about all these mechanisms and stuff and all these different layers and all of these staircases in Big Ben, I don't really understand what that means. I can't really picture that in my head. I can try, but the issue with this one here is the moving between all of these locations. You've got the lab, you've got an inn, you've got submarines, you've got a dry dock, you've got vast areas of forest, you've got stone circles and stuff like that. And in the climax, these characters are splitting off, joining each other, going to different places. And you've got an idea throughout this book of kind of where these places are, and it doesn't really matter if it's not accurate to what Justin Richards is thinking. You can kind of create it in your brain. You know, the promenades and the dry dock and the inn feel quite close to each other, and then you have the lab, which felt to me as like a little bit of a couple miles away, stuff like that. But then you get to the climax and they're running in and out of labs, secret rooms and stuff that all of these dead scientists are waiting for their life energy to come back from the humans or whatever. It's all a bit chaotic. Annoyingly, it really does destroy what would be a satisfying conclusion, because you're getting, well, I am anyway, you're getting annoyed because you're like, I don't understand the placements of these characters. They're talking about like aliens following them, aliens being in front of them, and kind of villagers being in different areas. It's all somewhat interesting stuff, but really difficult to follow. And so that really does take the book down a notch, notably just because of that, even though the rest of the book is genuinely really strong. The introduction, it goes by fast, so it's not too much of an issue. It's not the most amazing, but I'm not a massive fan of introductions anyway. But the whole midsection of the book is phenomenal. Even the first kind of part of the final act, where they do start to try and get away from these massive blue blobs and stuff like that is really interesting. And you do the plot twist with one of the scientists being one of the, there's already a plot twist with Sophia being one of these people who is trying to stay alive, and then you've got one of the scientists, Klebanov, who is also one of these people, and there's this other character who's like kind of soothsayer kind of character, this blind guy who has a link with these aliens. It sounds a bit confusing, but it does make sense for the most part. And Klebanov kind of makes him talk to the aliens and kind of basically ends up, so Alex, like I mentioned earlier, Alex ends up having to kill him. He doesn't want to kill him, but he's had to do it before in the past. That's one of the lies that he had to cover up, but it's kind of necessary because of the things that Klebanov has led them to do. Editing Sam here. I forgot to mention that there's actually this really interesting part with that blind soothsayer guy. In all of these novels, there is kind of like a forced reference to Bad Wolf in some way or another in all of them. But this one actually kind of uses it in a little bit of an interesting way. So this soothsayer guy predicts that he's going to be killed by a bad wolf, but he's referring to a tattoo of a wolf on the arm of his killer, and that obviously ends up being Alex. So it's actually the first one so far, at least, that incorporates the bad wolf mention into the story, into an actual kind of plot point. So you're waiting for this reveal of where this wolf tattoo, well, with where this bad wolf is going to show up, basically. And it ends up being Alex. Obviously, you sympathize a lot with him having to kill this guy. So it is actually quite interesting. So with that being said, the Deviant Strain, which, by the way, in case you didn't know, the title is based off of the actual font that they used. The Deviant Strain is really interesting to read, but it's just like the final, like literally just this section maybe that is a bit of a struggle. But like I really want to try and not make that ruin how much I enjoyed reading this story. It's the first one really that I have properly wanted to keep reading. So with that, I will be giving the Deviant Strain a 7.75 out of 10, or maybe even like a 7.8 or 7.9, but I'll stick with 7.75 out of 10 just because I like my quarters and halves and stuff like that. But it so narrowly misses that 8 out of 10 spot, which I think 8 and above, phenomenal, great story. It's just the ending that lets it down a little bit. Up next is a novel that I believe has been praised quite a lot. It's Only Human.